shall I draw attention to your foolish reliance on personal combat? You've got strange dragon powder arms, but you waste them on spectacle and flying chariots. Any decently civilized people would have developed a proper array of personal sidearms by now, like old Mirabelle here.
Oh, actually, I should explain. I should explain more. So about the fact like why China did not go out and conquer very much. It's not entirely true. Like there were periods in Chinese history when there was militaristic expansion. But like the Chinese culture, China has a culture has been relatively coherent for thousands of years, and this is not the case for Europe. Like the only thing comparable in Europe really was the Roman Empire, and that was the biggest empire and the longest lasting, like the longest lasting European empire. And if you compare the Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire, the Roman Empire expanded to a certain extent and then stopped, right? Like they conquered North Africa, Spain, like maybe most of Great Britain, and then they stopped before Germany, and then they expanded down to Egypt. They got a bit of the Middle East, not that much, and of course they got Anatolia, which is where modern day Turkey is. So the Roman Empire expanded to a certain size and then stopped. And the Chinese Empire is also a similar size, and it also kind of didn't expand very much further. Like they kind of grew and shrunk a little bit. But I think there's actually a practical limit to these historical empires depending on how, because it's really difficult to control something that's very far away. For example, if you want to give a command, right? What do? You send the emperor sends a messenger on a horse to ride out to the frontiers to pass the message to the frontiers, right? So it takes days and weeks to get out there. And so when the boundaries of your empire is so far away from your capital, from where your emperor is sitting, it just becomes impractical for like you lose control of it because they're so far away that, for example, if somebody decides to rebel, you can't react fast enough to stop them because it takes like a week for the message to get to you, and then you have to send your army out there to kind of stop them from rebelling. By the time you get there, they're already entrenched, right? They've already had time to fortify themselves. So it's practical stuff like that. And you remember that the Romans were famous for building roads, and the building of roads allowed them to extend that reach, right? Because roads mean that their messengers can get out to the boundaries faster, and it means that their armies can reach different parts of the country or the different parts of the empire faster. And so, like, good infrastructure expands the practical limit of your, like, the practical distance of your empire's rule. But even that still has a certain limitation. So if you look at Europe after the Roman Empire, like most of them were smaller, and eventually it just kind of fragmented into smaller kingdoms. And so it's just not it's impractical. Like large empires are impractical given the technology. And even like if you look at the Europeans, I mean like the world empires were around that size, like the Roman Empire, the Chinese Empire, and then of course everyone else, the Persians and everyone else, and the the Islamic Caliphate, like they were all kind of like a similar size before they stopped. Like they were all kind of like a similar size before they couldn't expand any further. And I think it's just a practical thing. Like they're so like when the edge of your empire is so far away that you can't really control them anymore. Like the reach of your armies and the reach of your influence just can't go that far, and so you just can't, either you can't control stuff that are that far away effectively, and so your empire can't expand any further. And later on, you might say, well, what about the age of colonization? What about later on the Europeans sent their sailing ships to the Americas and around Africa, and they started experimenting with it. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I mean, at that point, sailing technology improved, and so and even then, like all of the colonies weren't all that stable. For example, when the British colonized North America, and then they lost the colony, like the United States declared independence, because of the same thing, because it's not practical to try to rule a land that is a few months away in terms of like communications. Like you just can't control it, and so the British Empire lost the United States because of that problem. And of course, later on, as technology improved, as sailing improved, and then as communications improved, the practical reach of your empire expanded, right? So now today, with satellites and radio, and you can cross the Atlantic in a matter of hours. So not, I mean, not with ships, but with planes, right? With ships, even with ships, like it takes you like a couple of weeks at most. So now, like, it's a lot more practical to have this global empire, but of course, it's also practical for other people to fight back because weapons are stronger. What I'm trying to say is, like, the Chinese were had a reputation for not expanding very much, but if you look at the size of China, it's like the size of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire also did not expand beyond that particular size. So it's like, yeah, you're right. China didn't really expand for thousands of years, but that's because that's the practical limit given the technology. You know what I mean? And like, there's so much history you can give examples of. Like, you can take the Mongol Empire, for example. Like, Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, they conquered. Apparently, they conquered everything from Korea all the way to the edge of Europe, and you're like, wow, it's a massive empire. But that fell apart. Like, it didn't last very long. It lasted for a little bit, but very quickly, that huge area fell apart into like I think it was four separate territories. So when Genghis Khan died, his sons kind of split up the empire between themselves, and even though they were, if I mean, is ostensibly they were one empire, but it was kind of ruled by several different people, and eventually, like, it fell apart too. So, like, you can kind of build a vast empire, but to hold a vast empire for multiple centuries is not actually doable given the technology at the time. And even today, like, Russia, Russia is like, it's the biggest country in terms of land area. And even Russia, like the Soviet Union, managed to, you know, um, annex bits of Eastern Europe into the Soviet Union. And then it fell apart too. Like, it lasted for a few decades, and then the Soviet Union fell apart, and Russia is now a bit smaller. Like, it lost Ukraine, it lost a bunch of, like, lost Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and stuff like that. So, like it kind of, and then it pulled back. So even today, Russia or the Soviet Union couldn't hold on to territory that size. So it's not like you know what I mean? Like, it's not easy to have an enormous empire because like there's so much stuff you have to manage if you're big. Anyway, so that's like, it's not. So I don't really see it as a criticism of China that, oh, you're so many thousands of years and your borders didn't really expand much. It seems perfectly reasonable to me. Like, I mean, India didn't expand very much. Like, Japan is always Japan. I mean, they tried to expand in the Second World War and then they got beaten back. Um, there's like a lot of cultures have the same problem. Like, Persia didn't expand very much further than what they ever did. The Islamic Caliphate never managed to conquer all of Europe. Like, you know what I mean? Like every single empire in the world kind of reached a certain size and then stopped. It's really practical things that really prevented having it. Anyway, so what he's saying here, gunpowder being used for like rockets and things instead of guns. Sure. Well, we invented cannons. We didn't invent handguns. I don't quite remember why that was the case. I think China, like when we invented gunpowder, I think China wasn't quite as warlike at the time. It was the Mongols who were really warlike. It was the Mongols who really took gunpowder and made cannons out of them. But I think it was mostly because China wasn't really into war at that particular moment in time. But we did make rockets, and rockets are a big thing these days. I mean, not for war, but we have rockets. Well, for war too, missiles and rockets. So I don't see that as a problem either. We don't want such destruction unleashed on our land. You're obviously hiding a lack of ability elsewhere. Simple toys with no use for them. At close range, the advantage you claim to have disappears. A coward's trinket, we would feed it to you. Yeah, like guns. Hmm. Yeah, because Europe at the time, like it was the Renaissance, right? It was the late Renaissance when gunpowder became a big thing. And there was so much war back then, There were so many warring kingdoms in Europe. And of course, whenever there's war, military technology advances quickly, right? And I think China at the time, if I remember right, China at the time was not a bunch of warring kingdoms, and so we didn't really have the opportunity to make a lot of big new weapons. I think that was it. Not that it matters too much because the Chinese adopted cannons and guns pretty quickly once they were invented in Europe. Like the Chinese invented gunpowder, and then the gunpowder was spread to Europe, and then cannons and guns were invented in Europe, and then the cannons and guns were spread all the way back to China. And so these technologies kind of just flow back and forth, and people build on each other. It's not like it's like, all right, so we didn't make guns first, but we made gunpowder first. It's not like it's like a cooperative enterprise of mass murder. It's not really a competition of mass murder, more like a cooperative thing. We invent the powder, you invent the guns, and we all kill each other. That's kind of what it is. All right, we do not want such destruction unleashed on our land.
Well, you are
Ah,
clearly in the
crap.
minority, but I can spare no quarter. To the next topic.
Really? Why did I lose those
I
guys?
challenge your foolish beliefs and the irrational behaviors they produce. Dragons, spirits, and even talk of unresting dead. Pah! Just look at the collective foolishness that you call a floating palace. The constant superstitious yammering of your peasants even has me seeing it. And how the bloody hell would you get a moat up there? It's ridiculous, I say.
Um, why did... So I lost two people with sympathetic. So factual... So if we count from the left to right, 2 and 3 is factual, 5 is sympathetic, 1 is raging. Mocking, you're debating your own eyes.
Well, you are clearly in the minority, but I can spare no quarter. To the next topic. I say that you don't seem to understand the relationship between the ruling class and the peasantry. Your commoners are far too happy to be productive. A proper spiral of misery shows that they are doing a decent day's work. Your peasants only suffer because of foolish superstitions about the dead walking around.
Oh yeah, the peasants in China lived somewhat better than the peasants in Europe. What is there to say about this? China has always been an agrarian society, like seriously agriculture, and like we have kind of irrigation. Irrigation was always a big thing, and the reason why China has such a big population is because like from the very beginning, the Chinese paid a lot of attention to agriculture and making agriculture work to support the people. And this is not quite the case in Europe, although the China has two big rivers, right? The Yangtze and the Yellow River, and the Chinese is quite fertile. I mean, China is like Egypt in that way, although we didn't like Egypt has the Nile and the annual flooding of the Nile. I suppose the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East in Iraq, and so what used to be Mesopotamia and Sumeria. So like those areas, so there's rivers, reliable rivers, and good fertile land. Although the Middle East it got a bit dry later on. So Egypt also always had a pretty big population compared to Europe. And the peasants of Europe, I mean of Egypt also, just because there was so much food, I think those peasants lived a bit better than the peasants in Europe. Like Europe, most of the areas were suitable for farming, but not necessarily ideal for farming, if that makes sense. Whereas the more fertile areas of Egypt, of the Fertile Crescent, and of China and India, the Indus Valley, like they were ideal for agriculture. So the agriculture yields were much higher. It like where there were these kind of reliable rivers, right? And so yeah, Chinese peasants actually had better lives than European peasants because of that, like more reliable agriculture. I think raging, whip your own servants, you understand nothing.
Well, a majority on your side, but the debate is not over yet. This will be the final topic. If you don't have a majority at the end of this round, you will have to admit that I have outdone you. A simple criticism. Your ridiculous clothes. Not a decently puffed pair of trousers to be seen. I ask you, what have you done on the pantaloon front?
That's pretty funny.
And why do you remain so clean when any sane man knows the only way to keep devils of the dark at bay is to be brash and to carry the air of the earth?
Well, that's just pure
Bathing is
racism.
bad for the humours as well. Do you people know nothing of maintaining your bile?
That's just being racist about white people. We prefer social consideration over scaring spirits. I think this is what I want.
Well, it would seem that a majority of your fellows have decided your arguments were more persuasive. I expected no less. I could not expect a fair contest in the heart of your city. I was a fool to think otherwise.
Yes, you were a fool to
I
think
seek
otherwise.
satisfaction. You have bested me in debate, but true honour is decided on the dueling field.
You are... Alright, if that's what you wish, I'll meet you in combat.
The entry hall here has walls to be up against, corners to be backed into, and floor enough on which to be down but not out. Whatever your metaphor, I'll beat it. Return to me when you are ready, and we will walk there together, just to ensure that no one gets lost or suffers an accident that would prevent a fair fight.
Right.
Frankly, I don't know what you people are capable of.
I'm ready now.
What? Good! Let's get this over with so I can return to schooling the rest of your fellows. I envy you. You are about to experience for the first time the skill that has forged an empire and traveled the world. There will be pain as well, but I imagine it will be almost worth it.
Is he dead?
That was a fine display of skill.
It was a fair fight, Sir Roderick, within the rules you specified.
Yes, old boy, you've got it right. I was really sat down, I believe. Like the fall of the old bridge across the Grand. My humours are in disarray, I tell you. I supposed I should have seen it coming. Your win in the debate was a sure sign. I do believe I have underestimated the lot of you. Regardless, you have beaten me. That's a point of honor I cannot deny.
So, this is not how racism works, right? So here, what we are presented with is a man, well, like let's say a person, two different cultures. Let me just keep this neutral. There's two cultures. One person who believes the other culture is inferior tries to prove that, the other person disproves the claim, and then the first person accepting that their culture is not in fact inferior. This is how you think bigotry and racism might work out. This is not actually the case. How bigotry actually works is that the first person, does not truly believe strongly that the other culture is inferior. But in order to subjugate and dominate the other culture, they have to convince themselves, convince other people, and most of all convince the other person that they're inferior. And so even if they don't really believe it, they have to say it over and over again until everybody thinks it's true. And in doing so, you don't accept evidence. You keep saying whatever it is that you want to say. Does that make sense? So if I want to subjugate you, I'm not going to let you have a chance to prove that you're not inferior. I'm just going to keep telling you you're inferior. And I'm going to keep punching you until you accept that you're inferior. And that's how I subjugate you, right? So it's not and there's nothing you can do to convince me that you're not inferior, because my objective is to make you feel inferior. My objective is not to learn the truth, right? If I want to subjugate you, my objective is not to learn the truth. My objective is to make you believe that you're inferior, and that's how I subjugate you. That's how racism and bigotry and subjugation works. So something to think about. Something to think about. It was not your day.
Well, there's no other thing for it. Intended or not, you've earned a reward from me. The unsuccessful combatant in a duel must arrange a worthy gift for the victor. I wouldn't be much of an ambassador for my country if I didn't abide by its customs. The Duchess of Almsbottom's rules of engagement are quite clear on this matter.
Well, good for you. Good for you, white man. I prefer something useful, your weapon, for example. Physical strength is the quality I'm interested in. I'm interested in improving my mind. I'm concerned with spiritual matters. You can count on any interesting gems. Your weapon.
Mirabelle is yours. Treat her well. She's a finicky lady.
Really?
Right, first of all, fluff my travelling trousers. We will darken this garden no more.
I has a gun.